I've been wrestling a dilemma since Stalker 2 released a few months ago. I want to praise it for keeping me engaged for over 350 hours. I also want to condemn it for a release so busted that it gives Cyberpunk 2077's farcical release a run for its money. And before the Cyberpunk apologists start flexing their fingers, I didn't see nearly as many bugs during my playthrough of Stalker 2 as others reported, but that doesn't mean they weren't there, so leave the revisionist rhetoric at home. The critic in me believes that Stalker 2 deserves to be panned for deliberately disgorging a broken game to a trusting audience. The gamer in me, however, wants to praise Stalker 2 for delivering much of what I hoped for in the next installment in the franchise. What's a guy to do? I've built this channel on honesty and what I believe to be fair criticism, and I'd be a hypocrite if I ignored Stalker 2's glaring issues. I'm sick of busted games, I'm sick of companies hoodwinking customers, and I'm sick of being sold a lie. We've put up with it for over a decade, it's a cancer in the industry, and players are fed up. Does siding with the gamer in me betray the critic, betray my core beliefs and expectations for bug-free video games? Was Stalker 2 really worth the wait, and is it worth playing now? As I listen to friends and colleagues rant about the poor state of the game, the answer seems obvious. So why can't I get enough of Stalker 2? Why is it always on my mind? Why am I still playing? Stalker 2 is an interesting study because it's one of the few games where my conventional expectations about a video game release have been dumped on their head. In this video, we'll dig through this dilemma to reach a conclusion. A quick note before we begin. I didn't record footage specifically for this video like I normally would. The footage you're seeing is taken from my long play series on the Blondfire channel. The series is nearing halfway through the story, so I won't have footage to back some of my points. When what you're seeing doesn't reflect what I'm saying, that's why. To be honest, when I started playing Stalker 2, I had no intention of making a video on it. I was playing for my own enjoyment, which is a rare treat. Besides, recording all 240 hours of playtime at native 2K would have obliterated my storage drive. The only thing fuller than that drive would have been Mr. Beast's closet. As always, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about video games, so make yourself known in the comments. Debate is welcome and encouraged, but be respectful. Welcome to the conversation. You gotta understand where you came from to know where you're going, so the old saying goes. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl was first announced in May of 2018. This statement will already get the hackles up as furious keyboard warriors bang out a, well, actually, in the comments. The concept of a Stalker 2 was announced in 2010. The intent was to create a brand new engine to bring Stalker into modern gaming. A year later, in December of 2011, GSC closed their doors, and all plans for Stalker 2 were effectively binned. When GSC announced Stalker 2 in 2018, it was a new project with a fresh team and different goals. No lofty ambitions for developing another in-house engine, hence development for Stalker 2 we now have began in 2018. GSC's initial announcement came with an ambitious release date of 2021, only a few short years away. This was an early warning sign of things to come. Shadow of Chernobyl, GSC's first Stalker game, took 7 years to make, and its development was full of roadblocks, bugs, and setbacks. Turns out that making an engine from scratch and coding an ambitious game master into your game requires a lot of time. Even with 7 years development, GSC were forced to shove Shadow of Chernobyl out the door before it was ready. Watch my Shadow of Chernobyl videos if you want to learn more, links in the video description. We gave Stalker 2's development timeline the benefit of the doubt, partly because GSC wouldn't need to code a new engine. They picked Unreal Engine for Stalker 2, and that came with additional support from Epic, which they didn't have while developing Shadow of Chernobyl. Funny how Epic can support the engine which made them, yet disregard the IP which launched them to stardom. Bring back Unreal, Sweeney, you coward. Even with Epic's support, I expected delays. Modern big-budget game development takes a minimum of 4 years, let alone trying to code and balance something as complex as Stalker's famous A-Life. Stalker 2's 2018 announcement wasn't for the benefit of players, though. Epic Games' Director of Publishing, Sergei Galyonkin, said in an interview that GSC was still in the design document phase, and that they were hoping to use the hype of Stalker 2's announcement to secure a publisher for the game. Old habits die hard, but in truth, this is how business is done. Gamer hype began 2 years later with official trailers and teasers priming us for the 2021 launch. The growing optimism was predictable, but what I didn't expect was the healthy dose of caution and skepticism many expressed. Like me, others were starting to doubt the short time frame, and Shadow of Chernobyl cast a long shadow for Stalker fans. We remembered the promises, and we remembered the launch. Highly curated videos did nothing to allay my growing fear that Stalker 2 was shaping up to be all swagger and no substance. GSC weren't showing natural gameplay, and everything they did show had the obvious sheen of marketing polish. There are Instagram influencers less manufactured than Stalker 2's reveal videos. Something was wrong. I felt it, and they were openly telling us by omission. Stalker 2 wasn't ready. The world went into lockdown in 2020. Something about a worldwide pandemic, something. My government likes to pretend it never existed, and really, who could blame them? Embarrassing yourself on the world stage will do that to a country. There's no question that lockdowns devastated businesses and economies across the globe. It forced many to use tools they were unfamiliar with to continue working, if they could, and stay in touch with others. GSC, however, weren't overly affected by the lockdowns, and even said that it sped up areas of development. There's a link to their official Reddit post in the video description if you're curious about this. A worldwide pandemic was the flicker of a candle compared to the firestorm of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Going into detail of this event feels callous for a game analysis, but lives were turned upside down and missile strikes and rolling utility outages ravaged the country. Imagine working on a video game while racked with grief. Imagine fearing at any given moment a rocket could turn your studio into a smoking crater. Imagine trying to code, animate or design while your heat and power intermittently went out and stayed out for days. GSC even set up a temporary office in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, and relocated any of their staff who didn't want to stay in Ukraine. Stalker 2's release was delayed numerous times. The first was from 2021 to April 28, 2022, and I expected this delay. I also felt that 2022 was still too early, and this announcement only deepened my worry for Stalker 2's release and the health of the team. GSC announced another delay in December 2022, and this was understandable given the fierce conflict that now assailed their country. But this was still far too early, especially so given the disruptions caused by the war. There was a real chance that GSC might walk away from Stalker 2 to defend their country, which was understandable. And that's what they did for a time before resuming work on Stalker 2 months later and announcing a launch date of late 2023, which was pushed back to early 2024, then pushed back to September 5th, 2024, then finally to November 20th, 2024. I expected another delay until Q1 2025, but it never came. Despite empathy for the ongoing war, fans were sensing a familiar pattern with Stalker 2's delays. Even though much of it was attributable to things well beyond GSC's control, some fans grew restless. GSC had opened early pre-orders to drive interest and bolster initial funding for Stalker 2. Many gamers had already invested their money into GSC and wanted what they were promised years ago. GSC were, once again, facing the familiar pressure of their hype losing steam. The longer Stalker 2 remained in development, the more costs would drag potential profit. I wouldn't be surprised if investor pressure played a role in Stalker 2's final release date. Rushing the game to market was the only option, and GSC knew it. The first professional reviews for Stalker 2 dropped on the day of its release, November 20th, thanks to a damning review embargo. We'd seen publishers pull this move before, and rarely was it a good sign. The game's media reviews were the first real critical impressions we had, and it felt as though the community was holding its collective breath for a verdict. We were cautiously optimistic, but deep down many of us knew what was coming. Reviewers reported a highly immersive and at times gorgeous experience, modeled by frequent bugs, technical issues, frame drops, claustrophobic AI, and gameplay imbalances. Opinions were as varied as the scores, and for once we glimpsed the games journalism of old, who offered earnest on-topic reviews, generally free of irrelevant social commentary and political nonsense. Reviewers sounded like people, instead of scoreboards tallying off faux social clout. Rather than aggregating the media reviews like I normally do, I'll focus on one for this video. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a name many of you are probably familiar with. I first heard of S.T.A.L.K.E.R back when he and his brother Sam were stinking up the layman gaming couch with their cringe yet hilarious banter.
Yeah, a little bit
Russian? Was it Ivan Drago? Was it Sly or was it Arnold?
Yeah, a little bit of Sly, a little bit of Arnold.
I loved watching those two, and it was through Layman that I initially found S.T.A.L.K.E.R, aka Ralph of the Layman. Both channels got me through a rough patch in life, so I've always had an emotional connection to them. Furthermore, Ralph's professionalism was unlike anything else in the industry, and I highly respected his work ethic, even when I disagreed with him.
Balaclava now.
Bomb has been planted.
We're going to examine S.T.A.L.K.E.R's review. Not for drama, not for clicks, but because I respect S.T.A.L.K.E.R and have relied on his clarity in the past when buying games. In case any of his subscribers are watching, let's be clear. The following section isn't rage bait. It isn't meant to humiliate or belittle. I agree with many of his points, but not all. Rather than iterating what we both agree on, and let's face it, what many of you already know by now, I'll discuss the things he said which I don't believe are true, or, in some cases, are factually false. No drama, no bullshit, no personal attacks. That benefits no one. In his opening statement, S.T.A.L.K.E.R states that Stalker is a very deliberately boring, grueling, frustrating experience designed to test your endurance. Skill-Up doesn't qualify which Stalker he means, and the implication is that the statement applies to the entire franchise. As a longtime Stalker fan, and having spoken with many who love the franchise, I can confidently say that there isn't a single Stalker out there who believes this. There are many levels to enjoying Stalker, and I'm not going to list them all here, but the only part of that statement which is correct is that Stalker can be grueling, broadly speaking. Skill-Up's statement may be incorrect, but Stalker 2's bugs and unrefined gameplay did it a huge disservice during the review window, and that's GSC's failure. A poor understanding about what makes a Stalker game engaging was Skill-Up's failure. This statement sets a broadly negative and grossly incorrect impression about Stalker, and the review is barely started. I could do a deep dive on the compelling nature of Stalker games, but that isn't the focus of this video. Moving on. Skill-Up had a big issue with the carry weight limit. He mentioned it several times and ranted about weight limits in video games, making them seem as fun as getting clapped in the spuds with the bottom of a soccer shoe.
This fucking encumbrance system. I really do believe that if you removed encumbrance from like 95% of video games that utilize it, you'd instantly arrive at a better video game. And never has that been more true than in the case of Stalker 2. Oh my god, I cannot explain to you how utterly crippling this encumbrance system is here.
I've heard these rants from other gaming personalities and their minds are already made up, so I'm not going to rationalize Stalker 2's inclusion of a weight limit. It's fine. Instead, I'll point out that Shadow of Chernobyl had a weight limit of 50 kilograms, 30 kilograms less than Stalker 2. Weight limits aren't a new feature in the Stalker franchise. Also, not once in any of Skill-Up's footage did I see weight-boosting artifacts, suits with carry weight mods installed, or even suits with a baseline carry weight boost. Many weapons can also be upgraded to be lighter, further reducing Skiff's carry weight. No mention of the Hercules consumable either, they temporarily boost carry weight by 20 kilograms. Skill-Up never explored or made it far enough in the game to realize this, but it's possible to boost carry weight to a whopping 140 kilograms, almost double the base carry weight. Skill-Up's footage also showed a bloated inventory loaded with vodka, water, beer, and other consumables, all of which quickly become heavy, and there was other stuff junking up his backpack. Careful inventory management has been a pillar of the Stalker experience since Shadow of Chernobyl. You control the items you carry, mate, and if you want to keep everything, drop the excess in a stash for later retrieval. To Skill-Up's credit, he played the review build, where some quest-related items were heavier than they currently are, but you don't carry these items all the time, and this doesn't excuse poor inventory management. Skill-Up couldn't locate his personal stash in S.T.A.L.K.E.R. For those unaware, the personal stash is a chest in all major camps where players can store items for later retrieval. The personal stash is universal. If you drop an item into it in Zalicia, the item will be there when you open it in Rostock. It's the main way players retain excess loot. Skill-Up's stash wasn't where the map marker indicated it should be. The problem was a wrongly placed map marker, which was another of GSC's oversights, and I understand Skill-Up's frustration. He lugged a full backpack around for 2 hours before finally spotting the personal stash in S.T.A.L.K.E.R, which is located near the trader. It was a frustrating experience and obviously an oversight, but there were options. Skill-Up could have stored the loot in another stash, any stash around the base. There are numerous stashes within easy reach in S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and they're not hard to find. Any one of them could have been used to temporarily store items. Skill-Up may not know enough about Stalker to understand this was possible, and that's okay. So what about using a guide to fast travel to Zalicia and use the personal stash there? The crux of this issue wasn't the misplaced map marker so much as his growing frustration, but this situation could have been avoided with lateral thinking. I noticed in Skill-Up's clips that he was almost always radioactive, and, like the tidiness of Asmongold's house, he seems to accept it as homeostasis. Among his complaints were the static dots of radiation which appear around the edges of the screen when players are irradiated. I watched Skill-Up's review before playing Stalker 2, and when I began playing, I expected the effect to be persistent and aggressive based on his review. It wasn't. It was barely present, and when it did appear, I removed the rads with a swig of vodka. Basic radiation management was included in the tutorial, so I wondered what Skill-Up was doing differently. Was he equipping radioactive artifacts and not balancing them with anti-radiation artifacts? Stalker 2 does a bad job of relaying game mechanics which new Stalkers should know. It's obvious that Skill-Up wasn't aware of, or at least wasn't expecting, to find artifacts which remove radiation. He didn't progress far enough in the story to realize that some armor has artifact slots which can be upgraded to shield them from artifact radiation. Being irradiated should be the exception, not the rule. So, is this Skill-Up's fault? It's hard to say it is. GSC did a poor job setting player expectations in the tutorial. Old hats like me know what to expect. For new players though, Stalker 2 is dense with systems which are never adequately explained. Shadow of Chernobyl failed here too, so it's disheartening to see that poor tutorialization from GSC's first Stalker game, released in 2007, was carried into a 2024 game. Lessons should have been learned, but it's not entirely GSC's fault. Skill-Up made it far enough in the story to pass through the Great Swamps, and so should have had armor decent enough for artifact container upgrades. Had he been paying attention and expressed a modicum of curiosity, he might have noticed them. In his review, Skill-Up says, quote, "There's a surprising lack of mutant enemy variety in the game, and what's here all feels like it's one or two enemy types that have been reskinned." End quote. There are giant mutant meatball things that just run at you, mutant boars that also just run at you, scary little dogs that also run at you, and skittery little rats that run at you. According to Skill-Up, quote, "The general theme for all of these enemies is they run right up to your face and hit you, and that's all they've got. And it's just kind of uninteresting given the sorts of enemies you could have in a zone transformed by the impacts of a nuclear incident." End quote. What are we looking for in starter region enemies, mate?
Sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
I'll ignore the fact that almost all the mutants mentioned were in the original games because it's an obvious rebuttal and something anyone with even a moderate interest in Stalker knows about. Flesh, the meatball things as Skill-Up calls them, are now able to jump in Stalker 2. Putting what was once a largely defenseless mutant in Shadow of Chernobyl near the top of the food chain of the low-level mutants. This means that climbing onto something to avoid them doesn't guarantee safety. Boars have a charge attack which knocks players down, and a pack of them can easily stunlock and kill an arrogant stalker. Blind dogs hunt in packs and come with their own unique behaviour. When their numbers are strong, they surround and swarm their prey. When only one or two remain, however, they might flee, cowed by the culling of their pack. I won't defend the jumping rats. Skill-Up is right, they're arse and I hate them. Let's address the most obvious issue. Quote, "And it's just kind of uninteresting given the sorts of enemies you could have in a zone transformed by the impacts of a nuclear incident." End quote. Well, there are two issues. First, Stalker's Zone wasn't created by a nuclear incident, not in whole. Second, the footage he uses to make this point showcases a fight with an armored elk, a mutant which is among the rarest in the zone and is dangerous for being able to summon lesser mutants to fight for it. All the boars, rats and dogs in the Trapper fight are summoned by the elk, but you'd only realize this if you encountered another elk in the wild, through exploration. Sorry, what's that? You want true abominations of the zone? How about poltergeists? 4 flavors of them, and the only reskin in the game. How about Psydogs, Snorks, Bayans, Controllers, Pseudogiants, Buras, and Chimeras? They're less common, except the damn Snorks, because they're high-level mutants, but there's plenty of them out there. Skill-Up didn't explore, I mean really explore. The main story puts many of these mutants in your path, but Skill-Up didn't make it through the entire story. How can you make a claim like a lack of mutant diversity, with authority, having not engaged fully and faithfully with the game? This sends the wrong impression about Stalker 2's mutants to those new to the franchise. You'll remember your first fight with the Bayan, the cat-like creatures, because it's a fucking wild ride. Your first poltergeist fight will be memorable too, I guarantee it. And don't get me started on controllers, they're more dangerous in Stalker 2 than in the original games, and I love them for it. If Hassan Piker or Pokemon were controllers, it'd explain a lot. Skill-Up's statements are also disingenuous, accidental I assume, as his footage of the Extreme Simplicity mission means he would have faced, at a minimum, 2 poltergeists, 2 controllers, a Bura, a bunch of Snorks, an armored elk, a Psydog, a Bayan, and a Chimera. All these creatures are among the more nightmarish and tougher mutants of the zone, and they all require different tactics to kill. Some can harm players without physically touching them. How's that for fucking variety? The variety remark really pissed me off because it's so far off the mark, yet stated with a conviction that leaves no room for doubt. This self-confident oversight is becoming endemic of the mainstream review process and scratches another mark on the growing list of reasons I take professional reviews with a grain of salt. And while Skill-Up himself has stated that it's healthy to get second and third opinions, the reality is that many people won't, certainly not when their favourite reviewer speaks with such authority. Skill-Up said there was one occasion where a stealth kill didn't work, but the accompanying footage shows his target as Taris Fearsome, moaning unintelligibly. He tried to stealth kill a zombie. I tried this too and confirmed that stealth kills don't work on zombies. Considering the advice players get for killing zombies, the system is working as designed. I do agree with Skill-Up that stealth is horribly inconsistent. Alert states trigger through walls and in situations where they shouldn't, and visual detection in the open world is bonkers, especially now that spawn distances have dramatically increased since the latest patches. How can an enemy identify me when all they are is a speck in my rifle scope? It's also worth pointing out that the open world detection has reduced in distance since patch 1.2, though the odd alert states still happen occasionally. I guess stalkers are so hard now that their gaze can pierce concrete. Such is the Slav way. Skill-Up was optimistic about Stalker 2's future and believes that it'll become a fantastic game with time and effort. I agree, though for broader reasons than bug fixes and technical polish. Interesting that Skill-Up never mentioned the in-game economy, but I expect his attention was elsewhere. I'll cover the economy issues later. You might wonder why I've been so aggressive dissecting Skill-Up's review. I began watching Skill-Up because he had a burning curiosity which fueled his exploration of games and their worlds. It was a curiosity I shared, and so I found his videos to be on point with my taste. Stalker 2 never felt like it got this treatment. In fact, it's obvious to me that Skill-Up rushed through, and in doing so arrived at ill-informed opinions about a surprising number of things. The uncharacteristically casual callousness of some points is inaccurate and unfair, and they deserve to be called out. OpenCritic, as of 20th of March 2025, scores Stalker 2 at 75%, with only 63% of critics recommending it. The player rating, though, sits at a mighty 90%. Despite the bugs and technical issues, Stalker 2 found its core audience. Let's be fair, reviewers were playing a markedly different game than even the day one patched release we got. It never should have been like this, but it was, and it's tough to level heat at reviewers when so much was broken. I don't blame Skill-Up for not finishing the game. I would have stopped at the first broken story mission. There were plenty of those, even with the day one patch. So, if this was the review version, how did the commercial release fare? The raw bleed of an alarm dissolved my nightmare of being a character in The Sims, controlled by Patrick Bateman. I sat up, dragged a fist blearily across the crust around my eyes, and checked the time. Thursday, 2:30 AM. My chest fluttered with excitement as I rose, went into my office and sat at my computer. The Stalker 2 page on GOG Galaxy was loaded and waiting. The install button was a vibrant purple. Grinning like Nikocado at an unsuspecting Happy Meal, or 20, I clicked install. Then I returned to bed. 17 hours until I could finally play what had seemed, for over a decade, like laughable fantasy. I was excited for Stalker 2, the most excited I have been for a big budget game since Doom Eternal in 2020. I took the week off work, bought some beers, and desk wiped everything off the calendar so I could enjoy a solid week of stalking the exclusion zone. In the handful of weeks before Stalker 2's release, I had finally relented to the gameplay reveals, preview videos, and hands-on impressions. My initial reservations began to melt, and I dared to believe. So, I pre-ordered the game, something I rarely do with double or AAA games anymore. I watched reviews of Stalker 2 while I waited for it to download. News of the day one patch spread renewed hope among the community that the commercial launch might not be as rough as reviewers had it. The patch was massive, a 130GB plus colossus, almost as large as the base install. GSC knew what was broken ahead of the review window and had been hard at work fixing it before Stalker 2's commercial release. They didn't slow down, even after launch. Stalker 2 received patches in quick succession immediately following release day. GSC's dedication to the game and their fans was admirable and appreciated, but it quickly became clear that the sheer scope of work would take more than a few weeks, or a few months. GSC were facing at least a 12-month patching schedule to bring Stalker 2 to completion. Nevertheless, GSC worked up until Christmas of 2024 patching Stalker 2. Considering how burned out the team must have been after launch, I'm in awe that they had the stamina to push through another month. Little by little, Stalker's biggest issues were being fixed. On the 19th of December 2024, GSC dropped an early Christmas present, patch 1.1. Up to this point, one of the biggest and most persistent criticisms of Stalker 2 was the non-existent A-Life. GSC had promised an A-Life 2.0 for Heart of Chernobyl, but veterans knew within hours of playing the game that it was, like Adam Sessler's soul, absent or horribly broken. To appreciate why A-Life is so important, we need to understand how it became the pearl in the center of the Stalker clamshell. While many have heard of A-Life, considerably fewer understand how it works. I've even had someone try to argue on Twitter that actually A-Life has never been important to the franchise because it was broken. I could have filleted a loaded revolver after reading that horse shit. Revisionists are a special breed. A-Life comprises of two features. I'll discuss the obvious one first. The A-Life code in the original Stalker trilogy had several functions. It dictated where NPC stalkers and mutants went in the zone. I'll refer to mutants and stalkers as NPCs for this section because it comes up a lot. A-Life also controlled the general NPC populations, spawning more if they were killed to keep the zone full. Finally, it was responsible for simulating NPC movements and resolving conflict in offline mode. Offline mode, very generally speaking, encompassed all the NPCs beyond the player's sight. There was a radius around the player where NPCs could physically appear and become online and be able to fully utilize their behavioral code. When NPCs were offline, they would despawn to conserve computer processing. Offline NPCs weren't visible to the player and their actions were simulated by A-Life to lend the illusion of stalkers going about their business. If a stalker fought a pack of dogs in offline mode and died, A-Life would track that death and players could stumble across the body. Unlike other games of the time, Stalker kept track of all NPCs in close to real time, even if players weren't in the same map. A-Life was like a game or dungeon master in a tabletop game who ensured that events in the world continued to happen, regardless of whether players were around to witness them. A-Life gave each NPC basic objectives, such as reaching a specific area or populating a location. So, for example, A-Life might instruct a loner to travel from Rookie Village to Garbage Region. NPCs were coded to have enemies and friends, usually in the form of factions, and they acted according to their situation. If our loner ran across mutants or bandits on his way to garbage, NPC logic would temporarily take over and he'd fight them since they were classed as enemies of the loner faction he belonged to. Assuming our loner survived, he would resume his objective of reaching garbage once all threats were gone. The power of this system should be obvious. Stalkers would travel around the various regions, giving the residents of the zone a sense of independence. They weren't mannequins waiting for the player so they could spout dialogue or get into a scrape. A-Life made the zone feel alive, but it was only one of two symbiotic components. The other, lesser-known component was smart terrain. Smart terrain, or the Gulag as it's amusingly referred to in Stalker script files, was an ingenious design mechanism for the time. It too has been a fully functional system since Shadow of Chernobyl. Specific areas on each map were designated as smart terrain, and there could be many of these locations in any given map. When NPCs were directed to go places by A-Life, they were, under the hood, fed a specific smart terrain location, and sometimes even a specific task. Smart terrain was more than coordinates or locations though. These locations acted like a magnet. NPCs who travelled into their range could be captured by smart terrain, hence smart terrain being called the Gulag. Each smart terrain had NPC quotas and specific tasks to carry out which instructed stalkers on how to behave when they reached a smart terrain. A camp location would make stalkers guard the area, sit by the fire, tell stories and sleep. Some smart terrain assigned different tasks depending on the time of day, showcasing an NPC awareness of time. If an NPC's objective wasn't related to that smart terrain location, the smart terrain would eventually release them, and they would continue their original task. So you'd see a stalker come to a fire, eat some bread, drink some vodka, then mosey on into the sunset. The combination of dynamic NPC movements and smart terrain gulags created an intricate web of life in the zone. NPCs had purpose, but the path to their goal could meander or stop periodically. It made every trip into the zone unique and added an unpredictability which was exciting. You were never sure what you might see, and this kept the game fresh. And for anyone doubting the ability to roleplay as an artifact hunter in Shadow of Chernobyl, artifacts respawned indefinitely. A-Life and smart terrain were Stalker's secret sauce. They've always been there and have always been important to Stalker's identity. That modern mod packs have refined and expanded them only further illustrates how vital they are to the experience. Here's an example from the Stalker Anomaly mod pack. Here, in debug mode, we see A-Life in motion. My character is in Cordon, but we're viewing the actions of stalkers at the northern end of the zone, many kilometers away. We can even see which smart terrain and actions they've been assigned, and we can watch them do all of this in near real time. Anomaly has an expanded and refined A-Life, able to control NPCs in every region of the zone, where Shadow of Chernobyl could only manage NPCs in regions adjacent to where the player was. But the system is fundamentally unchanged. That is the power of A-Life. A big thanks to the highly knowledgeable YouTuber and Stalker Anomaly modder Cat's Paw Adventures, and to modder MFB for answering my questions about A-Life. This section wouldn't have been possible without them. Back to Stalker 2. Even with the day 1 patch, NPCs seem to wander in and out of a comically short spawn radius, suddenly appearing somewhere around the player, usually from behind and often hostile. This meant that there was frequently no way to avoid combat, let alone see these encounters before they were forced upon you. In the most egregious cases, NPCs would spawn mere meters from the player, alarmingly appearing from thin air like an AI video in a YouTube feed. Mutants were no different, haunting players with their sudden appearance. Functionally, the player was a tiny man island in the vast sea of the zone, and stuff would randomly wash onto their shores unbidden, only to wash away, never to be seen again. There was no permanence to the denizens of the zone, and that was when anything appeared at all. It wasn't uncommon to go long trips without seeing a soul, which was just as isolating. Everything felt transient and spawned solely for player engagement, and to a Stalker fan, this felt fundamentally wrong. You couldn't scale a structure and watch the world move on without you, because the bastards would spawn on top of you and crowd your perch. They weren't just here, they were here for you. You think that's hyperbole? A group of snorks appeared right next to me while I was exploring a rooftop in the old army warehouse base. I had many encounters like this. Patch 1.1 was the first major update to A-Life, and the effect was dramatic. The range that players could spot NPCs and mutants was almost doubled, greatly improving the player's ability to detect enemies and decide whether they wanted to avoid or even ambush them. Squad sizes increased from the uniform 3 men or mutants to 6 or 7, and squad sizes had greater variability now, sometimes as low as 2 or even 1. Stalkers moved about the zone more frequently and in greater numbers, which meant more skirmishes and random encounters, not only with the player but among themselves. It wasn't uncommon to see a squad fending off bloodsuckers or boars. And finally, Stalkers had a greater persistence in the zone. They stuck around camps longer, and when they decided to pull up stumps, players could follow them around. Life was returning to the zone. The A-Life update had a profound effect on looting. More bodies more frequently meant more stuff to loot. And while most recurring tasks still lowballed players by a fair margin, trip expenses could now be recouped somewhat by skirmishing with enemies and looting their gear. Some squads were so well geared that you could turn a tidy profit from headhunting them. Stalker 2 received numerous minor patches after 1.1. I was still in the meat of the game through all these updates, and so I've witnessed Stalker 2's recovery in real time. On my Bonfire channel, I'm still running a long play series of unmodded Stalker 2, which began at release. You can see the gradual refinement of Stalker's gameplay for yourself. Again, there's a link to the Bonfire channel in the description, if that's piqued your curiosity. I'm not going into detail about the patches, the point is that the game was already improving at release, and the updates haven't stopped. Let's discuss the actual game. Finally, Blondie, Jesus Christ, Monolith be praised! But rather than talk about how it is now, I'll jump between the old and current experiences for comparison. Stalker 2's tutorial area continues the Stalker tradition of rogering new players with a star picket before they've found their feet. SkillUp joked that this area was designed to make players quit. I think it was designed to get the death count up before the game starts to make a statement. It's like a prison hazing when you first step into the shower block. Players are assaulted by a flesh, a bloodsucker, and a poltergeist, and must fend them off with a colbasa and a fierce shriveled penis in the pitch black of night. Mutants were notoriously spongy on release, taking a ridiculous amount of damage before buying the farm. Bloodsuckers were especially buffed, so much so that GSC reduced mutant resilience in later patches amidst a roar of complaints, and Bloodsuckers got the heftiest chop. In short, new players are dry-humped hard. Aside from the tutorial pop-ups, which are useful, simply throwing players into the bandit shootout after speaking with Richter would have been a kinder start. Oh, and you lose all the stuff you looted during the tutorial, unless you had the foresight to stash it before the cutscene. Not player-friendly, not a good first foot into the zone, and the patches have done nothing to address this. Why are a Bloodsucker and Poltergeist, enemies who are god tier for new players, in a tutorial? All the reviews I watched and all the feedback from my friends and colleagues say that no one appreciated this start. After the tutorial, we reached the meat of the game. Once the training wheels fell off and the opening narrative was finished, man, it felt damn good to be back in the zone. Familiar starting pistol in hand and a group of bandits to practice on. It's here where Stalker 2 began to impress. The splintered picket fences, the rusted iron outhouses, the peeling paint and creaky floorboards. Within moments of leaving the tutorial, I was home again, falling into the familiar habit of exploring for hidden loot while capping gap-toothed crooks. Stalker 2 immerses much like the original games did, by meticulous attention to detail. Every texture, corner, brick, wood pile, and car fills the world with a rich narrative. No 1,000 planets of bland mocking homogeneity. Each place tells a unique story. Stories of the quaint past, stories of the bitter present, stories which foreshadow the bleak future. There was a happy life here once, and as a father I found it surprisingly hard to face the child's ball which would no longer be thrown, the faded tricycle which would no longer elicit shouts of innocent glee, and the filth-crusted doll which no longer sought comfort in the arms of her tiny master. Stalker 2 understands the emotional power of the zone and wields it with finely practiced cruelty. Locations feel lived in because of this detail. The details proclaim every space in the zone. The campfires ringed by rusty, empty food tins and vodka bottles. The stained mattresses pulled into defensible locations. The lone bucket, thoughtfully placed and concealed in the grease pit of a garage to afford a measure of privacy when taking a crap. Details are everywhere, and each location is haunted by its own stories. This isn't the campy implausibility of Fallout 3 or 4, this is the grounded reality of transient life. I grew up in the outback, and these locations felt so authentic that it was like stepping back in time to my childhood, picking through the rusted ruins of a long-abandoned camp. Stalker 2's soundscape is a masterclass in design. Boots slosh through mud, bushes rustle as unseen critters scamper through them, and trees creak in the breeze. When one of the zone's impressive storms hit, your speakers light up with a cacophony of detail. The groan of the trees becomes a dire warning, thunder crackles across the sky, and loose fixtures tease danger with each clank on metal. There's so much detail written across Stalker 2's oral signature that it's impossible not to be impressed by its depth. The frequent lightning storms are an otherworldly force, terrifying and impressive. Leaves whip through the air like deadly shards, and blazing blue streaks of lightning slam the ground, and you, if you're unlucky. It feels dangerous to be outside when that green tinge appears around the foaming clouds, and it presents an additional hostility that I didn't realize was previously missing from the experience. I always found fresh detail to admire in Stalker 2's audio, something which, once it captured the ear, sat there to be appreciated among the rich sounds of the zone. It broadens the immersive experience in ways that visuals and animations can't achieve. Audio in games is always a vastly underappreciated art, usually playing a distant fiddle behind visuals, lighting, effects, narrative, just about everything really. GSC's audio engineers have done an incredible job bringing the zone to life. 350 hours in and I'm still finding new details. GSC touted Stalker 2's visuals as photorealistic, and while there are moments of beauty which present the power of Unreal Engine 5, there are also times when colours and scenes look flat. This seems to be an issue with lighting, as cloudy outdoor areas which don't have a strong light source to give depth to objects, become lifeless, and the texturing is painfully obvious. That isn't to say that Stalker loses its immersive quality, but I was periodically reminded that this was a video game. There's also the weird shading and artifacting which occurs when DLSS is enabled. It's very noticeable in busier scenes with lots of foliage and is a messy eyesore which, in some instances, can make it harder to spot distant enemies through shadowy fuzz. I'm an advocate for development studios squeezing greater optimization from their game rather than relying on Nvidia's frame generation technology to earn their bread. This technology should solely be reserved for allowing older hardware to be able to play a game. More developers are leaning on this technology now, and it's resulting in games which need DLSS on by default, even on high-end PCs. I'd be happier if this practice got buried and the lazy system resource management was fixed. Soon we'll have a generation of games hobbled by sloppy coding and propped up by companies like Nvidia just to break an even 60 frames per second. Stalker's soundtrack. Oh man. Stalker's soundtrack has become iconic. I still remember the old tracks created by the artist Moose all those years ago, the despondent themes now branded onto my soul. Stalker 2 features some good tracks which enhance the mood, but I constantly found myself wondering how each area would have sounded if Moose was on the team. He gave the original games much of their personality, and I can't help but feel there's a gritty raw edge missing from these new tracks, and that's when they decide to work. It's not uncommon for tracks to suddenly cut off for no discernible reason. I disabled the combat tracks within the first hour of play because they telegraphed attacks I hadn't noticed yet, and they didn't fit the theme of conflict in Stalker. Combat has always been as organic as the zone herself, and having a combat track suddenly pipe doof doof into my ears shattered the immersion. I don't know why GSC thought dynamic combat tracks were necessary. There's something chilling about the track never changing as players fight for survival, as though the zone is indifferent to the dire circumstances of the individual. Which it is. The tracks weren't for me, and at least GSC let me disable them. Exploration has always been the foil to Stalker's combat. Stalker 2's massive open world is filled with caves, splintered villages, petrol stations, industrial plants, and military locations to discover. Every region has opportunities to dig up the mouldering bones of the zone and sift through the past. Many locations aren't marked on the map, and there's an inherent allure to examining the map for the telltale sign of a camp, debris, or other abnormal features which might indicate loot or adventure. I was rarely disappointed as I scoured the unmarked discolorations for signs of habitation, former or otherwise. Many of these unmarked locations take you well off the main path, often bush beating to the boundaries of the map and sometimes beyond. This all plays to the strength of the setting and the adventurous urban explorer mindset which has drawn so many to a life of stalking. It's both ironic and a touch concerning that GSC didn't include the encyclopedia because they didn't think players wanted it. I wonder at the cool stuff we could have been learning as we meticulously dug up the deepening mysteries of zone intrigue. So much potential for storytelling left at the perimeter, too timid to follow us in. What else did GSC omit because they didn't think players wanted it? GSC have also spiced exploration and stash hunting with occasional puzzle solving. Sometimes locked doors require a key, but other times they need a pin code or a clever view to whatever is blocking the door on the other side. I really enjoyed these puzzles. They were an evolution of the stash hunting formula. Most were solved with simple observation, but there were a handful that heated the synapses, requiring careful exploration of the surroundings to find an answer. There were a couple of puzzles I flat out couldn't solve without help. Puzzles, while not rare, were still a touch sparse, and a few dozen more would have been welcome. While many of the puzzles were easy to solve, some gave me a satisfying buzz for finding the right angle which had eluded me for 20 minutes, or for sleuthing a cipher to a door code. I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but I never felt patronised by Stalker 2's puzzles. There was just enough resistance. They were a nice incentive to find more of these locations, and they complemented conventional stash hunts, offering a change of pace when the going had become routinely easy. Poignant moments crashed home as I discovered locations from the original games. I was elated at first, having found these iconic landmarks, but that bright feeling of triumph slowly faded as I picked over the remains of former life. Many of Stalker's original locations had moved on, now empty or repurposed. Every location from the original games was a new reminder that this zone wasn't the same zone. This zone had moved on and left part of me behind. Most of the original locations felt this way, mixing bittersweet nostalgia with redesign and recontextualization within a new, expanded zone. Perhaps these locations are more geographically accurate compared to the real-life zone, and it did make exploration fun as I hunted for familiar landmarks, but the experience was always chased by a sense of displacement. I grew to appreciate this feeling. It became a reminder that we can't turn back time, nor can we live in the past. For all the ways which Stalker 2 is like its predecessors, it's just as different, and no wishful thinking will ever change that. Change isn't bad though, especially when it comes to hunting artifacts. Stalker 2 uses the clear sky Call of Pripyat method for detecting artifacts. You need an artifact detector in hand and must be close enough for an artifact to appear. Artifacts are also furtive, zipping around anomalies to make collection harder. Much harder since patch 1.2. There's more skill to recovering artifacts now. You must trace a safe path through an anomaly field by throwing bolts, and the elusive artifacts make the experience more akin to a live hunt than simple item recovery. It feels better, it plays better, and it should be the gold standard for artifact hunting in Stalker games. The Stalker mod packs have you needing to upgrade artifact detectors just so that high tier artifacts can be detected. An increased ease of navigating anomaly fields and retrieving artifacts should be the reward for better artifact detectors, not a gamified version which blocks tiered spawns unless you have a specific detector. Bring back the skill of artifact hunting, we said, and GSC delivered. The greatest display of this refreshed artifact hunting is in the arch anomalies, and I wish there were more like them. A handful of unique anomalies lurk in the zone, each offering a unique arch artifact to brave players. I love these anomalies, they're unlike anything else in the game and function as a mental reset of how the zone works. There's an impenetrable mystery to each of these locations, and they're genuinely daunting to figure out. Stepping into the poppy fields for the first time, seeing your eyelids drag close with frightening frequency and knowing there's nothing you can do to prevent death if you linger. It's a powerful effect which puts players in their place and returns control to the zone. The arch anomalies draw inspiration from Roadside Picnic, borrowing the theme of unknowable entities which demand caution and respect. It's been a long time since the zone had respect in the world of Stalker. Modern modpacks have become a combat survival simulator and trivialized the more arcane aspects of the zone. I wish there were more entities like arch anomalies to challenge conventional pathfinding. But then, I've been pining for a deadly setting which is less Tarkov and more Roadside Picnic for a while, so I'm biased. Stalker 2's tone is bleaker than previous games, bleaker than even the Star Wars franchise's future. Characters are more nuanced, with believable morals, goals, and mean streaks. Stalker 2 is the first Stalker game to smudge the line between loner and bandit. Loners are sometimes cowards, leaving their fellow stalkers to face danger alone. Stalkers are selfish, self-interested, self-indulgent, afraid, malicious, cunning, and every gradient in between. Finding the purest line of a faction has never been harder in rank-and-file stalkers, and many side tasks riff off this conundrum. Hell, the crux of the story is not necessarily doing the right thing, but siding with whoever is less of a prick. Or more of one, if you're leaning into deviant roleplay. For instance, I found a loner pining for his gun which he dropped in the underground after getting chased off by mutants. He needed the gun to help pay off a debt, or bad people would do horrible things to his digits. Except, that wasn't the full story. Not only did he fail to mention that 2 Buras had chased him away, he also conveniently left out the part where he had followed a stalker to their stash and was in the process of robbing them when the mutants attacked. The would-be thief fled and left his victim down there to die. On one hand, I found it hard to root for anyone. The characters I thought I knew sometimes turned out to be assholes, not worth the spit in a dry mouth, and it made trusting or cheering for anyone tough. The game knows it too, and plays into the morally grey setting when presenting choices to resolve tasks. On the other hand, this is the most believable faction dynamics in a Stalker game to date. I criticised how one-dimensional Shadow of Chernobyl's factions were, that individuals never exhibited real personality or internal conflict beyond party lines, like social media tribalism really. Stalker 2 corrects this, and the fissures of doubt spread far and wide among most factions, which makes Stalkers feel more like people and less like useful idiots. A care and reverence for the source material are like rich veins which run through much of Stalker 2's design and themes. Unlike some Western developers who seek to alienate their core fanbase with incongruent themes and writing, GSC have remained faithful to the Stalker legacy and to Stalker fans. This show of respect is everywhere. The references to the past Stalker games, old locations, character motivations, gameplay mechanics, and even the leitmotif in the main menu and Cordon region themes. Despite the talented new crew working at GSC, it's clear that Stalker 2 is a passion project held in the utmost regard by the staff. That was among my biggest concerns during Stalker 2's development, an inch below technical instability and bugs, that the game would be a massive middle finger to the fans who kept Stalker relevant for the last decade. I'm so glad that my fears were unfounded. GSC have conducted themselves graciously, even after Stalker 2's release. Other studios should take note of how this team behaved in the face of criticism. Gunplay. People have mixed opinions about Stalker 2's gunplay. It's been rather controversial. Human combat is incredible. Fights with NPCs have a feedback to them which feels good, especially headshots which play a nice soundbite when you nail them. Enemies pour cover fire while their buddies advance or flush you out with grenades, and fights become hectic if they manage to flank you. NPCs were a touch spongy in the early post-release days. Perhaps it was an adjustment period, perhaps it was a patch, but they're less spongy now. It still takes effort if you're aiming for center mass, but the balance feels about right. The biggest issue, still prevalent as of writing this script, is NPC short-range weapons acting like sniper rifles well beyond their optimal range. Sniped by a cracker shotgun at 100 meters? It happens. Patch 1.2 addressed this somewhat, but enemies are still too accurate at range, especially with automatic fire. Weapon and ammo damage have also been tuned strangely. I'll preface this section by saying that I'm not a gun enthusiast. I live in a country where at least 6 months of red tape stands between you and a gun license, let alone gun ownership. Gun ownership in Australia is heavily regulated, policed, and taxed. You can't walk into a department store and buy a pistol, that concept is foreign here. In short, I know bugger all about bullet calibers, muzzle velocity, or the box-shaped things you put into guns. What are they called? Clips? I know a bit about games though, and I'd like to understand why 9mm weapons do more damage than 45s. Or why some 7.62mm weapons do as much damage as 5.56 or 5.45 weapons. Perhaps there was a genuine attempt to drum out the meta for Stalker 2's endgame weapons and leave gun selection to personal choice instead of optimal stats, but doing it at the expense of other, more powerful weapons leads to a strangely balanced roster. Does the caliber of bullet not contribute to the overall power of a weapon in Stalker 2? Should it? What do you think about this? Leave me a comment. Stalker 2's mutants are another controversial topic. For a while after release, they were buffed to a farcical degree, annihilating any sense of tactile feedback or progressive damage. You could pump a few rounds of buckshot into a boar's face and it wouldn't flinch. A lot of people were upset with mutant health, myself included. Subsequent patches have toned mutant health down, especially bloodsuckers who already have multiple advantages. Even so, new players will probably note how spongy some mutants are. Here's a hot take for you. I reckon the mutant health balance is close to perfect. Hear me out. One of my criticisms of the Stalker mod packs, and even the original games to some extent, is that mutants were too weak. Mutants are campfire horrors, the nightmare fuel that stalkers guzzle when the moon hangs forlorn in the sky, and the only thing keeping a cold stalker warm is the buzz from a nursed bottle. Mutants are played up as terrifying abominations which tear the unprepared into a pulpy meal. The reality, of course, is usually different. Stalker 2 has restored that balance, allowing mutants a fighting chance at being the dominant, or at least terrifying, force in the zone. They might be hard to take down initially, and that's the point, but they get easier as players get better gear and learn their attacks. I want mutants to be tough, and even though I was among the vocal majority calling for their downgrade at release, and it was required, I've since relaxed my opinion on mutant difficulty. Let them take 5-shotty blasts to the chest. If they still thrill me without feeling gamified, then I'm on board. The issue isn't mutant health so much as health feedback. Few mutants show signs of slowing down when they're hurt. Flesh don't lose their ability to jump, boars still charge at full speed, and poltergeists are as elusive with the first shot as with the last. More tactile feedback on a mutant's condition would go a long way to disguising the health pool with a beast worn down by combat. Creatures used to limp in the original games. What happened to that sort of feedback? Hell, you could have fun with this mechanic, lean into it for creatures like pseudo-giants and chimeras where they get a burst of adrenaline and become more aggressive the closer to death they get. Gear progression, the staple mechanism in the original games, is alive and well in Stalker 2. Gear drives much of exploration since travelling into increasingly dangerous areas requires better protection. This is especially true since Update 1.2, which has made radiation more pernicious. The upgrade system has a nice rhythm: explore and loot, return to base to repair and upgrade. I played on veteran difficulty, so this may not be pertinent to the average player, but the cycle of earning and spending cash was about right. Often, by the time I saved some cash, there were upgrades to spend it on, and this cycle repeated frequently with new weapons and armor. New weapons appear as players level up, better geared squads start roaming the zone, and vendors reveal more of their stock. There's a natural path players trace from the early game cheap and cheerful boomsticks and modelled AKs to the high-powered M701 Supers and Ram shotguns. Players retain guns long enough that they're worth upgrading, but not so long that they aren't supplanted by new gear, and this pushes an ongoing cycle of spending to justify loot and stash hunts. The in-game economy, the way players make and spend money, was busted at release. Patches have addressed some of the issues, but recurring tasks are still grossly unrewarding. People have tried to convince me otherwise, but the numbers don't lie. When an expedition to kill mutants costs more in spent buckshot, repairs, and potential healing costs, you've got issues. Rewards also don't scale with gear, which is a problem I'll get into shortly. A common rebuttal I hear is, "Blondie, loot is everywhere. You can earn your losses back by finding stashes and loot gear in the wild." There are a few problems with this line of thought though. First, what happens when all the place loot is gone? How do you recoup your losses then? Second, what happens if loot drops are tweaked? A dominant complaint among veteran players is that there's too much loot. What happens to this delicate economy when loot drops are dialed back? Reckon you could still turn a regular profit on recurring mutant hunts? I doubt it, Sonny Jim. Third, if hunting for random hostile squads or finding artifacts is more lucrative, why bother with recurring tasks at all? I can make more money than many recurring tasks pay out by selling a single artifact. Once you know what you're doing, artifact hunting is cheap, quick, and easy. Likewise with hunting enemy stalkers. Sure, there's greater risk and spent resources when you fight, but the payout is often better in sold gear, even on low-level squads. And this payout only gets better while completing the main quest. So again, why bother with recurring tasks? They need a large buff, and they should be self-sustaining. That is, players should be able to recoup their losses while completing the task with a little profit left over. By making recurring tasks self-sustaining, you remove any of the hassle of having to rebalance them again if, I'd argue when, GSC change loot drops. I'm shocked by how poorly balanced the rewards are, and I believe that their current balance is short-sighted. The recurring artifact hunt tasks were in the same boat when the game released, but GSC have since rebalanced the task payout and price of artifacts, making both more lucrative. They clearly identified an issue but didn't apply it across the other recurring tasks, and I'll be damned if I know why. I also find it strange that none of the reviews I watched mentioned this issue because it's important to the balance of Stalker's economy and was bloody obvious to anyone who did these tasks. Recurring tasks received a buff in patch 1.0.1, but most payouts are still nowhere near enough to justify doing them. The modern repair system was initially the cause of much pain, particularly on veteran difficulty. A common complaint at launch was that all the profits players brought home were gobbled up by hefty repair costs. All gear needs to be repaired or it begins to break down, weapons begin to jam, and armor loses protection. Repairs are an unavoidable constant throughout Stalker 2. Repair costs appear to be calculated off the total value of the gear, so if a sunrise suit costs 30,000 coupons, the repair cost is calculated off that value based on the suit's condition. The worse the condition, the higher the cost to repair it. Pretty simple. Upgrades add a huge wrinkle though. The cost of every installed upgrade is added to the base value of the gear. If I purchased a mod upgrade for the sunrise suit, which is valued at 10,000 coupons, the suit is now worth 40,000 coupons. And guess what that does to the repair price? Yep, it goes up too. That's all beer and skittles for low-level weapons whose upgrades are so cheap they come from a dollar store, but when you start talking suits with a base value of 50,000 and all upgrade trees fully unlocked, we can be talking hundreds of thousands of coupons in additional value. In other words, suits and weapons you upgrade become ridiculously overpriced, which hyperinflates the repair cost. Firing a couple of magazines could set you back thousands in repairs. There were times when the loot I hauled back wasn't enough to cover the cost of repairs and my bank balance slid backwards. It's worth noting that I'm a loot goblin, I leave nothing behind. How would a more casual stalker fare in this situation? Things have been rebalanced a little since then, but the idea of a weapon or armor being worth exponentially more than its base value by installing a bunch of mods is ridiculous, and equally more ridiculous to base a repair cost off that inflated price. To be fair to GSC, Stalker 2's rebalance is ongoing. When I began writing this script, we were on patch 1.1.4. As of writing this paragraph, 20 pages in, we're on patch 1.2.1. And with the final edit, we're on patch 1.3.1. GSC have fixed a ton of bugs and technical issues, expanded A-Life 2.0 to mimic more natural behaviour, and added more features, which, combined, have begun to make Stalker 2 feel more like an authentic Stalker experience. It's come a long way since launch, but there's still more work to do. Stalker 2's plot is something which YouTube scholars will pick apart over the coming years. It deserves a separate video, I'm not discussing it here. Broadly speaking, the first third of the story was confusing busy work which should have been condensed, and the latter two-thirds was dense with references and buried meaning, which I loved, but only hardcore fans would appreciate. It'll take some time to pick it apart and sort through the strange collection of feelings I had while navigating Skiff's journey. I've only seen two endings, Strelok's and Skiff's, and both left me with questions. Many questions for Skiff's ending. Many story missions were convenient excuses to send players all over the map. Many of these missions should have been cut from the main task and been given their own side tasks, complete with worthwhile rewards. What rewards? How about a mod which permanently increased carry capacity of any armor it's installed in? How about unique attachments like night vision scopes? How about access to a guide who could be called to come and get you on demand and take you to the nearest friendly camp? How about a unique artifact which boosted run speed or jump height? Not to mention rewarding additional pieces of the narrative puzzle. Are you telling me that people wouldn't want to get their hands on these things? Of course they would. Just dangle the carrot and they'll come. I prefer this method of freeform exploration over shoving the player all over the map. GSC could have been bolder in daring players to skip side content at the expense of narrative enlightenment. I'm sure everyone has their own list of stuff which they reckon needs to be fixed. I've already mentioned a bunch, I'll list the rest here. understand that any individual player-driven list of issues is scratching the surface, and only GSC know the full scope of the work ahead of them. First, I've had 4 anomalous sites across 2 separate games which I can't get artifacts from. The artifacts appear on scanners and I hear their signature sound, but they appear to have spawned inside props or outside the game world and I can't physically reach them. Most alarming is that 3 of these sites were spawning artifacts fine for a while before suddenly breaking, so there's no reason to believe that other sites won't break over time. Furthermore, I visited many of these anomalous sites only once, so more sites may have broken which I was unaware of. And an update, some of these sites were fixed in patch 1.3, but there may be more. Some upgrades are permanently greyed out, no technician can install them. This only seems to be an issue on a handful of gear, but it's disappointing that you can't fully upgrade some items. I noticed this issue on some armor which I've forgotten the name of, but more prominently on the SVU sniper rifle, which I love the hell out of in the late game. Its final upgrade was a decent bump in penetration damage, so it was annoying that I couldn't install it. Patch 1.2 may have addressed this issue, but it was worth including in the list, just in case. Another glaring issue is that players are spotted through solid objects, and the alert bar can suddenly spike for no discernible reason. This has been a problem since launch, and while patch 1.2 has tweaked NPC detection, it hasn't been dialed to a point which feels balanced and fair. I encountered a nasty issue with a couple of recurring tasks which wouldn't complete properly, and which locked Harpy and Barkeep from offering more tasks. This was a widespread issue which affected multiple task givers, and many players complained of this bug. The 1.2 patch notes reckon this is fixed, but I haven't been able to verify it yet, and so included it here. I, like many, had huge issues with the now infamous Cilicia defense mission. Enemy squads didn't spawn properly, and those who did spawned inside a building designated as a safe zone, and I couldn't kill them. Some characters who were supposed to offer side tasks related to the town's defense didn't, meaning that 2 key characters weren't available at Cilicia for the rest of the game. No trading or repairs for Blondie. After a final monumental test of patience and a huge injection of luck, I was able to complete the town defense task, but every time I spoke to Gaffer, the Cilicia radio broadcast played instead. Yeah, like Snoop Dogg the moment he popped out in the delivery room, this task was proper baked. Subsequent patches have gradually fixed the broken parts of this task, and I was recently able to complete the Cilicia defense in full without issue. That said, there were still notes in patch 1.2 relating to various fixes for this task, so I'm not confident that it's bug-free yet. There were nasty memory leaks at launch. One of them limited my play session to 2 hours before the frame rate cratered and I had to restart the game. This was easy enough to work around, but a bigger memory leak prevented me from exploring Rostock. I'm not sure exactly what triggered it, but if I stayed in Rostock for longer than 5 minutes, my game would lock up, then hard crash, sometimes bringing GOG Galaxy down with it, and in one instance it even corrupted the footage I was recording. If I entered the large shed where the traders were, that seemed to start a doomsday countdown to an inevitable crash, even if I fast travelled elsewhere. Patch 1.2 appears to have addressed this issue too, but I had to avoid Rostock when completing Stalker 2 the first time. A couple of guides vanished during my playthrough and never returned, despite icons on the map telling me they were there. They were in locations which were a pain in the minge to travel to on foot. This is yet another issue which the 1.2 patch claims to fix, though again I have yet to verify it. Stash markers are added to the map regardless of whether the stashes were already collected. This makes for some painfully frustrating stash hunts with zero payout. I don't believe this is fixed as of patch 1.3.1. The Faust fight has been fixed as of patch 1.2. This fight was a technical clusterfuck when I played through it the first time, frequently dropping to single-digit frames per second. The performance was so bad that it made precision aiming impossible, and the input lag was so horrendous that key presses were frequently ignored. It took me 3 attempts to beat Faust, and one of them was cut short when the game hard crashed to desktop. This was the point where I almost gave up on Stalker 2. I'm generally tolerant of bugs, but it's a deal breaker when something blocks progress in the main quest. The story missions should be the most polished part of the game, since everyone will experience them. I game through the dirty orts, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend hours looking up homebrew fixes for a paid experience again. Gaming apes Amazon and eBay as one of the few mediums in the world where you can pay full price for a product and still get screwed over with minimal to no consumer protection. This level of imperfection wouldn't be tolerated in any other product on the market. Finally, sounds and music are cut off at random. This happens to music more frequently, which often stretches a trip across the zone into long moments of silence. Ordinarily, I wouldn't mind this, but the music is already a background presence, never heavy-handed, and having it cut off abruptly feels broken. Not as critical as other issues, but still something which must be addressed. Since we're making lists, here's a list of stuff I'd like to see in future. As mentioned, all recurring tasks which aren't artifact hunts need a financial boost to become self-sufficient. Guys, it's going to make future loot, artifact and AI rebalancing much easier. Run some quick and dirty costs from doing recurring tasks and bump up the pay. And with the artifact hunt tasks, it'd be nice to know which artifact we need before we agree to the task. Repair kits. I'm not the only one requesting this, and here's why. Long expeditions into remote areas makes keeping your gear in tip-top shape a low-down pain in the ass. A friendly camp can be up to 4 regions away. I'm looking at you, Duga region, and with the recent A-Life updates, you'll encounter resistance on the way back too, which further extends travel time. Going to and fro isn't a short process. The constant need for repairs demands a lot of travel, which compounds the sense of unnecessary busywork that Stalker 2's large open world is naturally prone to. And since we're talking about travel, how about a couple of artifacts which act as a mark and recall system? You don't have to let players travel everywhere on a whim, but being able to fast travel to wherever you left off would be a godsend and would cut back on much of the tedious travel. It's a perfect thematic implementation of a travel system. See S.T.A.L.K.E.R for an example. If you're not willing to do that, how about wandering guides in each region who charge to get you back to civilization? Would it really hurt Stalker 2's gameplay to add more fast travel options? The current loot pool makes looting feel underwhelming. A couple of bandages, a stick of salami, and a box of 9x18 rounds hardly qualify as a stash. And why does every NPC carry the same stuff? Why don't NPCs carry or stash artifacts? And why can't you take an NPC's money when you loot them? The loot pool needs to be expanded, taking a leaf from the many mod packs which have included weapon and armor components, repair items, and sellable junk, among other things. I'm not saying that Stalker 2 should include all of these items, but more consideration needs to go into what constitutes a stash, instead of copy-pasting a stash template. Dynamic stash contents would also go a long way to keeping each playthrough fresh and exciting. Where's the challenge in playing Stalker 2 again when I know where the best armor and guns are found? And how about making the stashes that require effort to reach contain more than the bare minimum? I'm sure Johnny Wingnuts wouldn't risk his neck balancing along a rusted metal beam 20 meters above the ground just to hide some vodka and bread. Can we also get a survival mode or some sliders to adjust the survival elements? It's kind of ridiculous that sleep exists as a mechanism, yet, just like real life, you can ignore it by chugging an energy drink. I initially thought sleep was busted because I'd gone in-game weeks and not seen a sleep symbol once outside of fighting Bayans. I didn't know at the time, but energy drinks appear to at least partially reset the rest requirement. Why include sleep if it's trivialized like this? Being able to advance time at a campfire would also be nice. And since we're talking about survival, I'd love to see a sandbox mode where players are free to roam around, complete tasks, and maybe help factions control their territory. Again, look to the mod packs for inspiration. I don't know which of the sadists among the GSC team devised the flashbang anomalies, but maybe we could dangle them inside one for a few hours. These have got to be the shittiest, cheapest anomalies in the zone. No visual or audio tell, can't make safe passage with bolts, and you'll almost inevitably see Jesus every time you accidentally stumble into one. I hated these anomalies so much that I avoided them, even if they were guarding stashes. They're such a cheap attack and behave unlike any other anomaly in Stalker 2. Throwing a bolt triggers most anomalies and opens a safe window for you to pass through. Not so with flashbangs. Throwing a bolt will trigger an attack, but it won't create a safe window. You can walk into the area while the bolt is still triggering another flashbang, and a new flashbang will appear next to you. It feels like these were deliberately placed to destroy the player's gear and force them to either turn back for repairs or risk pushing on. This is an incredibly dirty trick to play when there's already a ton of hiking to do across the open world. Enemy respawns need to be adjusted in some areas because they're too aggressive. You'll get done dealing with one mob and a new one will spawn within seconds. It isn't realistic or fun when squads appear out of nowhere to interrupt the looting and seem to exist solely to spunk hot sticky pressure on the player. I'm not saying that looting an area should be hassle-free, but at least let us spot incoming enemies as they approach the area instead of airdropping them on us. Oh, and finally, it'd be nice if we could mark items as favourites so that they appear at the top of the inventory and player stash. And if we're going that far, how about also being able to mark items for instant sale when we trade with vendors? The Stalker mod packs are already doing this, and it's a fantastic quality of life feature. A lot of talk about the state of Stalker 2, but where does this leave us? There are still 3 questions which demand answers. 1. Do GSC deserve criticism for the state that Stalker 2 released in, given all that they endured during development? 2. Was Stalker 2 worth the wait? And 3. Is Stalker 2 worth playing right now? So, do GSC deserve criticism for Stalker 2's release? Of course they do. AAA and AA games should never release in this condition. It's like buying a diesel-engine Toyota Dirt Cruiser 4-wheel drive straight out of the factory. But you discover it's electric, a bloodsucker claw leads out of the gearbox every time you gear shift, there are cuts all over the upholstery and some seats have been replaced with bloodsuckers, the fuel tank leaks, 2 of the tyres are square, the headlights flicker, the engine doesn't provide enough torque, and pressing the horn doesn't make a noise but instead summons bloodsuckers. There's no hope in hell you're fixing this car with a little backyard panel beating by Todd the mechanic, and why should you? Games are a luxury product. Many companies have apparently forgot this. We pay for a good and or service and we expect it to work at the time of purchase. That's the deal every time we fork over our cash. When that transaction isn't respected, we spend with a competitor, plenty of those in the games industry, or we save. GSC and their publishers tried to hide how busted Stalker 2 was nearing release. Hell, the review embargo lifted the day of release, meaning that those desperate for positive media scores likely bought the game because they couldn't wait for the reviews. That's what the publishing and marketing teams were hoping for. That's pretty scummy, and I don't blame anyone for feeling cheated. We were deceived, and the depth of that deception will slowly be revealed in every major patch for the next 9 months and beyond. The average day 1 release has become little more than a fully priced open beta test. Let's be specific with criticism, because releasing Stalker 2 prematurely wasn't a decision the developers sat around the campfire to vote on. As always, this decision was made by upper management and likely influenced by the publisher. Always keep that in mind when leveling criticism. We aren't talking about a faceless corporation. There are many people who work at GSC. They have faces, families, lives, and they bear the brunt of gamer anger long after managers and publishers have noped out and left the building. They knew better than anyone the state of the game, and, I'm speculating here, they were likely unhappy with the decision because they were fully aware of the shitstorm ahead of a premature release. They knew that audiences were fed up with broken games. That leads us to the other edge of the blade. Look, we're all adults here, we can hold opposing views simultaneously because that's the way life is, not some infantile us or them fantasy. Chocolate is delicious, but it's also horrible for your health, that sort of thing. GSC began developing Stalker 2 with the best of intentions, ambitious as they were, but no one could have foreseen a war interrupting development. Their country was invaded, and I don't think anyone would have been surprised or unsympathetic if they had shelved the game indefinitely. But they didn't. Through unfathomable turmoil, they worked. Every development studio has their own challenges, but there's nothing more immediate and extreme than the persistent threat of sudden violent annihilation. How many developers could have worked through this and produced something playable on the other side? We know the answer. What GSC have pulled off is nothing short of a miracle. That Stalker 2 is playable at all is a testament to extreme dedication and hard work. You can't compare this to the challenges of a Western game studio. You can't say an active warzone is the same as a microaggression, or being forced to work from the office, or no longer getting free lattes from the company cafeteria. GSC's horrible situation demands respect from the development community and gamers alike, and Stalker 2 should be viewed not as another broken promise, but a testament to a driven and hardworking team who vowed to see this game reach the finish line. Truly, my hat's off to you, GSC. What you delivered is leagues beyond what I expected. Yes, Stalker 2 is a special case. This isn't just another developer overpromising and underdelivering. It's more complicated than that, and only the most disingenuous of fuckwits would believe otherwise. You, my audience, get it. I know you do. Does GSC deserve criticism for Stalker 2's release? Yes. Gamers would have been more sympathetic had they told us the truth, and now GSC have to hope that they haven't burned the future goodwill with their customers. But honestly, team, great job delivering what you could considering the circumstances. Sincerely impressive. On to question 2. Was Stalker 2 worth the wait? Only 62% of critics recommend it, and with how rough the version they played was, I can't blame them. But I didn't play their version. I'm a gamer like you, and I played on release day, and what I found was an expansive zone bursting with locations, artifacts, and possibilities. Loot was scattered everywhere, and even though it became apparent that many stashes were simple templates, I was still excited to track down every backpack and solve every puzzle. The smattering of upgrade flash drives and unique gear was a baited lure which I couldn't resist nibbling at. Artifact hunting was a proper challenge, something worthy of a treasure hunter risking his skin for. The open ambient world, free of loading screens and filled with life, chirped, rustled and clanked my nerves to buzzing with each cautious step, and I felt alive in a way that few games have made me feel in the past half-decade and longer. Gunplay felt sharp and responsive, especially against human enemies, and even though mutants were spongy, I appreciated that they were a credible threat instead of a discarded bone for the atmosphere to gnaw on. There was enough substance to realize Stalker 2's potential. Longtime Stalker fans know that it's not just the strength of the base game, but the broad base for modders to build upon which gives Stalker its stride. It was there at Stalker 2's release, and modders were hard at work before the first 24 hours had passed, rebalancing gameplay and economy. I was so confident in the passion of the modding community that I knew even if GSC pulled stumps and walked away right now, we'd still be in good hands. But that's getting ahead of the question. Was Stalker 2 worth the wait? It was, in my opinion. Not since Shadow of Chernobyl had I felt the excitable tickle of adventure in my stomach. I was rediscovering the zone all over again, indulging the rush of Urbex's adventure, and I loved every minute of it. Most importantly, GSC retained the soul of the Stalker experience, never relinquishing its difficulty and its slower knowledge-based mechanisms for broader appeal. And in doing so, they attracted more attention and earned praise from players who had had enough of the same generic games, reskinned and retold. Players who appreciated a game which didn't hold their hand, didn't treat them like children, wasn't afraid to let them fail. Stalker 2 isn't a conventional video game, it's an experience. You don't play against this world, you live in it. Red Dead Redemption 2 was a rare generational phenomenon that lets you live the fantasy of being a frontier cowboy. The side activities, the free-form exploration, and the emergent storytelling supported the fantasy, making the world an organic and reactive entity. I spent countless hours guarding my poker hand at the Horseshoe Overlook camp. It was a largely pointless activity, never working me closer to a main objective, a new weapon, or anything of significance, but it fostered a sense of kinship with my fellow gunslingers. We bonded over a simple deck of cards. We built a connection which I didn't realize I was looking for in such a simple activity. When I returned to that empty spot many hours later, I was hit with a profound sense of sadness, recalling those memories and knowing that the carefree times were over. That simple activity formed a memory and feelings which transcended the game, persisted long after the disc had spun down and the console was powered off. We've all had that feeling of time taken for granted, of the past we cannot reach back for, no matter how much we yearn. Roleplay is more than choosing dialogue options or deciding who should die. It's being a willing participant in a world which acknowledges your presence. It's about collecting the grains and little pieces of self which life has chipped and filed away and sticking them back on, knowing that they'll be knocked off again, sometimes painfully. It's about putting the mechanical functions of gaming aside to indulge in activities which have personal meaning and which further ground player to character. The most memorable D&D sessions I've had have come from pure roleplay, when our party got into a bar fight because we argued over the filling in a sausage, or when my luck-challenged ranger front-flipped over a campfire, grabbed an unsuspecting mercenary and threw him into the flames. These moments were unscripted, and they're recalled with clarity because we made them. Blazing through Red Dead Redemption 2's campaign was objectively the wrong way to play, and overshot the point of Rockstar's meticulous design. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a recent example of experiential gaming design, merging gameplay systems and world building in ways which encourage players to fully embrace roleplay and invest themselves in the experience. Stalker 2 isn't as deep as either game, but it borrows the same design philosophy. It's a game meant to be experienced, to be lived in, to absorb players wholly. And while it hasn't fully realized this vision yet, it's getting there and was more than enough for old hats like me. It advanced some of Stalker's core mechanisms and will undoubtedly continue to build upon that foundation with future updates. Stalker 2 was worth the wait. GSC are back. And finally, is Stalker 2 worth playing right now as a version 1.3.1? Obviously, you'll find this video somewhere downstream of version 1.3.1. It takes a while to write and produce videos like this, and perhaps you find this video much further down the track. I can only speak to the state of Stalker at 1.3.1. In my opinion, the answer is yes. It is worth playing Stalker 2 right now, regardless of whether we're on patch 1.4 or higher. The major patches have improved the experience significantly, whether it's chasing down bugs, ironing out technical issues, or rebalancing gameplay. Stalker 2 was a blast at release, and each patch has deepened the experience in significant ways. I've watched this progression over the course of my Stalker 2 series on the Blonfire channel. I've seen firsthand the evolution of Stalker 2 and chronicle it for all to watch. Let's face it, I'm the target audience. When GSC designed Stalker 2, they had fans like me in mind. I'm a long-time Stalker fan, and I was always going to be partial to Stalker 2, even if it was a mess. And GSC's return to gaming is an underdog story I can't help but root for. You should keep that in mind when you consider everything I've said, but I'll elaborate further. I love exploration. I love being let loose in a world teeming with danger and interesting stuff to see. I love being allowed to fail and not know why. I love gear progression and the hunt for new stuff. I love skill-based puzzles which require attention, and I love finding secrets. Stalker has always offered these things, and it does so in a unique setting which compels like no other. There have been many imitators, but there's only one Stalker. Stalker 2 is pulling us in the right direction. There's a roadside picnic undercurrent to exploring the zone this time around. Lots of phenomena aren't explained, and you won't know if they're deadly until you test them. Then there are the arch anomalies, physics-busting forces beyond comprehension, even for the zone. A poppy field that puts you to sleep forever? Mystifying. A mini black hole that crushes and expels on an unseen breath? Terrifying. The Stalker modding community speculated how many of the mod pack systems would make it into Stalker 2. There was hope that Stalker 2 would be an Anomaly 2.0 or similar. That was never realistic, and I say that as someone who would have been on board for Anomaly 2.0. GSC have always used a simplified gaming model when compared with Anomaly's ambitious, expanded mechanics. Stalker 2 was always going to be Stalker, but in 2024. Gamified, but with enough edge to feel the cut of poor decisions. Expectation is a hell of a drug, but Stalker 2 never overpromised its gameplay features. It showed us what systems to expect, and the history of the Stalker franchise should have been enough information to build realistic expectations from. Stalker 2 isn't perfect, not yet, not by a long shot, and the development team know it. Do you remember the controversy before launch when developers were attacking fans over the inclusion of women in the zone? How about the shitstorm after launch when developers were calling their customers entitled because they dared to call out the broken launch? Of course you didn't, because neither happened. Furthermore, GSC developers have been transparent since release, receiving player feedback and using it to implement fixes. You know, old school development. Stalker 2 is a modern No Man's Sky. Not because it was as broken and feature bare as No Man's Sky was at launch, but because GSC are letting their hard work speak for them. Like Sean Murray, they accepted the criticism they surely knew was coming and have been tirelessly improving Stalker 2 with every patch since. All without lashing out at their customers or throwing churlish tantrums on Twitter. The contrast in behaviour compared to some Western developers is staggering, and I feel silly for complimenting GSC for their professionalism because this should be the baseline, the gold standard in communication from company to customer. To return to the question, yes, Stalker 2 is worth playing right now, regardless of what patch we're currently on. I know some will disagree, and that's fine. They're waiting for specific grievances to be patched, and they have their reasons for doing so, but the zone is ready now, and there's no longer any point in holding off for the big one. The magic patch to rule them all and transform Stalker 2 into the majestic bejeweled creature it was destined to be. We're already there. Everything else is extra glaze on the donut. Stalker 2 isn't for everyone, and you should now have a good idea of whether that includes you. For those eager to give it a try though, it's an experience you'll never forget. A fistful of thank yous to the supporters who brought you this video. You all have my back and I appreciate it more than words could ever express. If you want to support my efforts, there are links in the description. Patreon, locals, pick your poison. If you enjoyed this video, then headshot the like button. If you like my style, subscribe to the channel. The algorithm humps my leg when you do. If and you'd be so kind, sneak the Blondie experience into the barren YouTube wastes. Trade it for bottles of vodka with other like-minded stalkers. Remember the cant. Until next video, good hunting, stalkers.